CityWorks Expo is a collaborative, co-creative, and multidisciplinary idea exchange and festival conference that happens each fall in Roanoke, Virginia. By day, attendees are immersed in thought-provoking presentations, riveting performances, and engaging dialogue. By night, the conference continues with after-hours networking opportunities during street festivals, parties, and musical events. To learn more about Expo, visit cityworksexpo.com. Expo 2014 was made possible by these fine sponsors.
So I'm really excited to be here for a ton of reasons. I came in late last night, drove into this sort of menacing hotel on the hill, woke up this morning, came down to the lobby, saw the portraits on the wall, thought if I keep working hard enough on my beard, one day I'll get a portrait like that. Came across the walkway and into downtown Roanoke for the first time and thought, holy shit, how did I not know about this place? Like Ed, I've had the good fortune to look at cities around the world, and this one, I've just been texting people all morning going, Roanoke, did you know? Did you know? So it's always really fun to come talk to folks that already have some of it figured out and share a little bit about what we're figuring out where we are, and to tell you a little bit about a process. So I'll start with a little bit about me. You figured out I'm Josh. A little bit more about me. I grew up in the United Way system. I started as a secretary when I was 19 years old. A lot of people have worked at United Way over time. It's a grinding mill. Right now I work for the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. I'm the program director in Akron, Ohio, a wonderful post-industrial city that finds its roots in rubber, clay pipes, toasted oats, and a number of other things that are quite fascinating. I really mean that, and this reinforces, I'm mildly obsessed with Thomas Edison. My library includes almost every book that's ever been written about Thomas. I'm really fascinated with invention laboratories and places in history that created above average per capita intellectual property. My mother's a painter. My dad's a retired CEO. I write with my left hand. I occasionally dress like Elvis. I like to start things with other people. Create Here, a 5-year project in Chattanooga. Company Lab, which is economic development, Beehive. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these. Bring It Together, something where we restored a school in a week. And for some, maybe all of these reasons, people keep calling me a leader in civic engagement. I just kind of do what comes to my mind to do. So that led me to this question, what is civic engagement? And so I started my search online, and I found it in this sort of sea of sometimes meaningless words, many of which you probably encounter on a daily basis. And so then I turned to my heroes and said, all right, well, let's try to figure this out. Thoreau, always helpful, and just the reminder to simplify. Thomas Edison, who was so committed to finding the solution to make the incandescent light bulb work that he tried over 2,000 substrates to pass electrical current through them so that we can stand in this room today and not have intoxicating in a bad way gas lamps on the wall. But what Edison realized through the process was simplification to basic elements and then rigor. Charles and Ray Eames, who I have two of their chairs that would have pressed in their day in the 1960s in my kitchen, who were so obsessed with the best seating instrument that we could have that they created hundreds and hundreds of test objects until they simplified one piece of pressed fiberglass into what I consider the perfect chair. Ernest Hemingway, who had an editing process. Most writers right now have a 4-stage editing process where you revise. Ernest went 8 to 10 steps in attempting to make 20 words into 8 that still said the same thing, but perhaps more powerfully. And then I looked into popular culture, And a guy named Dan Pilata that some of you may have encountered, who runs Advertising for Humanity, put an article on Harvard Business Review that said, I don't understand what anybody's saying anymore. And it was the most common, I think to this day, it's still the most commented on article on Harvard Business Review, because people identified with it. They were like, yeah, I don't understand what anybody's saying anymore either. And then this other really, a great source of information, Rolling Stone, which has this article that was called Can Drinking Make You Conservative? Really fascinating article, because what it said is, actually the drinking was just sort of a proxy. What it said is that you go into the pub, you have a drink, you come back out, they test your ideology. You go into the pub, you have a drink, come back out, test your ideology. And then on average, people became more conservative. And what that was, in my mind, telling me is that the complications, they said you could have done the same thing with a marching band. That if I brought a marching band in here right now, that you would test less conservative than after the marching band's in here playing. And so it says that we need to simplify. And so the assault of sustained thinking yielded some sort of definition. So for me, civic engagement is the act of being the change that you want to see in the world. That simple. So what I see in all of these travels around the world and around the United States, and especially in post-industrial cities, is the humanity immune system is kicking in. Like, things are going well and things are going better, sometimes because of institutional intervention, but more times than not because of individual intervention. But it's not always pretty. And so on the drive down last night, I was listening to reports that are coming out of Hong Kong about peaceful protests there. We remember Occupy. We saw the Arab Spring. We saw the things that happened around public education reform. But we're not in a place of stasis. We are in a place of dynamism where things are changing rapidly. So that leads me to the question, how do we equip individual citizens to be the change that they wish to see in the world when there's no agreed upon manual? And I think thinking about it like that's important. We just had our first child. He's 1 year old now. And I feel the same way. Like, we bought 25 books, but where's the damn manual? I still feel like we're winging it. So I can't tell you much on raising a 1-year-old, but I can tell you a little bit on working in communities because we've put together a process. And so, and with rigor and over 100 interventions now, we've come up with a process and a couple of things that may be different about what you see here than the way that I was taught at United Way when I was 19 years old. The first thing that I do in process is identify champions, the people that give a damn enough that they're going to act accordingly, they're going to put their own time, their own resources into it, regardless of what confronts them. The way I was taught was you identify a problem and then you host a forum. And what I learned in that way was when you host a forum, then everybody comes in, establishes their territory, says, I'm not willing to flex any more than this, and we end up with rather mediocre solutions. So the way I work is we find the people, and usually it's less than 5, usually 2 or 3. We choose the problem. We determine the strengths of those people. What do you have that you can work with right now? We fall in love with the problem, and I'll revisit this again in the talk. We observe the problem in the wild. This is just basic human-centered design. Don't make assumptions about the problem that you're working with. Go be a part of it. Immerse yourself in it. If you're worried about sick people, lay in a hospital bed. If you're worrying about the way that buses work, then ride around on them for weeks on end. Don't make assumptions about what you think based upon your past experience. Do research. Seek wise counsel. The smartest decisions that I make in my life are because I spend a lot of time with people that are 70 to 90 years old who share with me what they've learned along the way. Create something. Determine sort of how you're going to operationalize that. Set some goals. Get some money. This is another thing that was bad about what I learned when I was young at United Way is we'd find a problem and then we'd set a budget. I wait really deep into the process. To one of the last questions that came up for Eve, we build an end date into every project, so I know when it's going to stop. Everything must come to an end. That allows everybody involved, funders, participants, to know that if this goes right or if this goes wrong, we all have an agreed to point that we're going to stop and say, okay, that's it. What do we do from here? package and design. In our sector, in community building, design tends to be an afterthought. Call your friend who knows how to run Adobe Creative Suite and say, hey, could you do a little something for me for free? And we find that, that doesn't always work out best, because when we're doing this type work, I don't think we're competing with each other. I think that we are competing with the new episode of Game of Thrones. Like, we are up against cultural forces, and so we've got to make community building just as sexy as whatever's going on the other side of your iPhone. Another thing here's where I fundamentally violate that 101 that I learned when I was 19, which is I build my coalition at the very end. I don't go out and onboard masses of people to help until I can tell them what we're going to do, how much it costs, and how long it's going to take to do it. Then we put the money together, then we act, we iterate, we measure, we document, we give it all away, and then we repeat. So what comes from that? Well, in Chattanooga, we were losing talent. We had Angelo Economics come into town. They said, you're losing your 18 to 34-year-olds. So we built this thing called Create Here, a 5-year project on arts, economic, and cultural development. It was just anything that we could come up with that might make Chattanooga stickier for young people. The work was all driven by 18 to 34-year-olds. So at the time, I was still in that age range, and we hired a group that was as large as 35 of juniors in college to within 3 years of graduation, and they built most of that suite of products that I showed you to begin with, a couple of the ones that I'll show you now. Chattanooga's not a 24-hour city. That was another thing that Angelo Economics said to us. So we went out and we said, we're going to pick 24 hours in December, and we're going to be a 24-hour city. And we called a neighborhood together, and we said we're going to do main times 24, and here's the clock, and here's 24 hours, and what can you do during that time period? If something you'd already do or something you've always imagined you do. And it wasn't very long before that entire 24 hours filled up. And with $5,000 in the first year, we saw 1,000 people show up. And I went down last year for main times 24, and they're bumping 10,000 people still with that same $5,000 and planting the seeds for how the city becomes a 24-hour place. We had artists, artisan, and creatives without business skills. This was pretty typical. Co-founder and I was coming from a business background. She was coming from an arts background. She said, lots of my friends are struggling because they know how to make their work, but they don't know how to make their work work. So we built this 8-week business planning class where you could go from idea to action. We put artists, artisan, and creative entrepreneurs, and people would ask me, what's a creative entrepreneur? Well, it was anybody that needed to get in the class. Frankly, we were trying not to compete with the Chamber of Commerce because they got really pissed off at us. And today, I'm proud to say we across the system, that project is now scaled. We've got a couple thousand graduates, mostly east of the Mississippi, but in cities all over the place that are learning how to take their own ideas to action. We saw investments in creativity going to institutions instead of individuals, so we built something called MakeWork, and MakeWork is over $1 million to individual creativity. We also saw investments going to individuals in the business sense, and so that's when I always bring out Max. And so Max was a guy who came to me and said, hey Josh, I want to buy a candy store. And you guys are probably with me that, backing Max on a business plan, probably not the best idea. Luckily, because we had the business planning class and because we had a system that was agnostic towards ideas that said, we want everyone to come forward and go as far as they possibly can, Max and I talked, and I was like, Max, do you really love candy? And he said, no, not really, but I don't like working at this investment firm that I work at. And so Max, what do you really love? And he said, well, I love to climb. So, well, I'm not sure how you monetize climbing. What do climbers need in this city? And he was like, they need a place to hang out and they need a place to stay. And so Max went on to build, the bottom side here is the Crash Pad, which is a now internationally recognized hostel. And he's now opened, I just have the drawing, but he's opened the Flying Squirrel, which is an incredible open-air bar that serves not just the climbing community, but all of Chattanooga. And I don't think we'd ever seen that happen if we hadn't built the systems that allowed for every individual to move their ideas forward, because, probably wouldn't have bet on Max. Limited art patron base. We invested in a number of artists through gallery programs, and like I said, about $1 million in individual investments. If you worked at the community level, it's really hard to shift those investments. You need a community foundation to where you can write checks to individuals. I work for a foundation now. I'm able to write checks to 501c3s, or I can partner with a community foundation who can then move the investments to individual. The movement of the investments to the individual, and I'm not saying abandon the institutions, but adding the individuals into the mix is transformative, because that's where you get your risk-taking going on. The institutions have to preserve their long-term identity. The individuals are just trying to build a future for themselves. They're trying to experiment. And so adding them into the mix has proven very valuable. Little things like we had less trees than other cities. There was an observation that our tree canopy was smaller than other southern cities. We got a number on how many trees we needed, and then we built a program called Take Root that allowed citizens to be involved in funding the trees, but you also need to take care of your trees. So it also crowdfunded a way and the foundations kicked in for the city to keep up the trees that the individuals were planting. Tree planting, too, is actually kind of an art. So it gave us a method to teach people how to plant a tree the right way. And we had a canceled opera season, and people came to us and said, oh, woe is us, there will be no opera in Chattanooga this year. And we said, well, how much does an opera cost? And they said, $200,000. And we were like, well, yeah, there won't be an opera in Chattanooga. But I said, I got $2,000. Somebody reach out to the artist and ask how much it costs for them to sing for one night. And interestingly, it was only a couple $100. I said, all right, well, let's keep them out of costume. Let's have them come into our studio, which doesn't cost anything. And let's spring for a couple kegs of beer, and let's get that guy who sells hot dogs that we know to come in. And we called it Hops and Opera. And for $2,000, we preserved the music, even though we couldn't preserve the entire theatrics. But what was amazing was about half the room was the traditional opera crowd, and about half the room was the hipsters with the kids running around, the folks from the neighborhood. So it turned into this incredible blend that wouldn't have happened in the $75 to $100 per head traditional opera venue. We had an issue in Chattanooga, not enough live music, a very specific pinch point. We weren't seeing the people that we wanted to see come into the city to play. We went out and did the research. We learned that we needed a venue that would hold 1,000 to 2,000 people. It needed to sell alcohol, which we wouldn't do in our public venues at that time. And it needed to be standing room only, because there's certain bands that just want to play standing room only. So we built this live music room called Track 29, which is now getting close to 4 years old. We opened Jack White's tour, the Blunderbuss tour. We had the Avett Brothers there. I mean, it's been really amazing to watch. I think total ticket sales are in the 40,000 range now. In Detroit, we had a different problem, which is new talent arriving, which is a great problem for post-industrial cities, one that most post-industrial cities don't have. But when I got called by the Hudson Weber Foundation to come look at the city, I got there, and they said, well, we did this thing. We said we wanted 15,000 college-educated people here by 2015, and it got sticky, and people started showing up. And now they're calling the foundation saying, hey, you wanted me to live here. Now, where do I live? Where do I get a job? What do I do that's fun? And they were a foundation with basically one staff member. So we came in to help. We built this thing called the D-Hive, which is right in downtown Detroit. It's a storefront about 3,000 square feet where you can walk in, and if you need resources to live, work, or play in the city, if you want to take a tour, if you want to go on a bar tour, if you want information on neighborhoods, if you want to do a checklist and go to every restaurant in all of downtown Detroit, All of those things are there for you. And interestingly, that work is predominantly run by, again, 18 to 35-year-olds that had a hard time finding a job, that are in there working for $12 an hour, but who are building a portfolio, who are helping their city, and who will more than likely, from past experience, jump on into better jobs after they do. This is sort of their Peace Corps tour, but in their post-industrial city. We had an issue of startup services being disjointed in downtown Detroit. Tons of resources for entrepreneurs. Next to no way to navigate those things. So we did this really simple thing called the Biz Grid, which is just a listing based upon where you are in your business. So over here, it's basically where you are in your business, and then what your needs are, and then there's a cross-reference field that allows you to find what you need next. Very simple graphic design, $15,000 type intervention, but has liberated a $100 million economic system that was out there for people to use, but that they found very hard to use. So depressed business area, this is Cincinnati, Ohio. There's a lot of ways to work on depressed business areas. Most of them cost a ton of money. So we wanted one that wouldn't be the same as the normal, facades, the sidewalks, the hundreds of thousands of dollars, the infrastructure that are necessary. So we built this project called CoSign. Basically took the American Sign Museum, sign designers. We figured out how to railroad the process at the city of Cincinnati. And we got the small businesses. And within a finite timeline, went to the neighborhood and basically said, we'll subsidize your signs. Come bring us your ideas. The businesses applied. They worked with the graphic designers. They worked with the artisans from the sign museum. And then on Black Friday, we unveiled these signs, the first round of these signs, and you can see all of a sudden these businesses went from something that you drove by and did not notice to something that you said, oh wow, there's really something going on there. And for $100,000, basically overnight, you changed the walk-through and drive-through of an entire commercial district. The problem in Detroit of economic inclusion, one that people are wrestling with all over right now. And so this is one that's in progress right now. We built something called Any Ideas, which is the New Economy Initiative's ideas contest. And for inclusion purposes, what I've learned is you can't wait for the people to come to you. You've got to go to the people. And what we looked at was business demographics, and we realized that businesses over 3 years old in Detroit were predominantly African American and immigrant owned. And so that's where the game was. So we took the game to those businesses and said, what's your big idea for your business? We've got $500,000 for you to submit your big idea for your business. And we are now within weeks of announcing 30 $10,000 grants and 2 $100,000 grants that will mirror the demographics of that community, which Detroit, for those of you that know it, is 85% African American. So instead of giving lip service to inclusion, we designed a game that goes straight to inclusion, that sets a playing field that's already inclusive from the get-go. And then my current problem, and so one of the reasons that I come out and do talks like this is so that I can learn. And so I'll put my current problem on so that I'll have something to talk with you guys about as we move through the next couple of days. I just moved to Akron, Ohio for the Knight Foundation, and we've got a real issue from 1960 to today. We've lost over 40,000 people. Over 20,000 of those are in the 18 to 34 category, so we've got a graying city. That erodes the tax base, that erodes the property tax revenues, that erodes the income tax revenues. It creates a real culture of scarcity. And so what I'm wrestling with now is with what seems like a lot of money when you grew up at United Way, and getting a de Tocqueville gift of $10,000 was a lot. So now that I have hundreds of thousands of dollars to potentially work with, that really pales in comparison to having lost 40,000 people and what you do about that. So I'm trying to figure out real strategies for how you stabilize a population base, or if you can't stabilize a population base, what you can do in the face of that that's not superficial. This is me and the mayor, Don Pasquale, and Mayor Pasquale is a hero to me. He's been in Akron for 28 years, and Akron has survived that downslide better than the other post-industrial cities that I've been to. But we're at a point now that we got to figure out what our best fighting weight is and work ourselves up from there. So a few final thoughts. I mentioned this early on, but I'll come back to it again. Love your problems, not your solutions. It's really easy to do when you're a thinker to say, okay, my issue is X, downtown vibrancy. My solution is Y, facade grants, and then to spend an inordinate amount of time working on facade grants, how to get them, how to distribute them, how to work through them, and never stopping to revisit the problem that you were in love with to begin. And so that's why I introduced to you my problems that I'm in love with right now: population decrease in post-industrial cities, enterprise creation. How do we put real businesses in every empty storefront in a city? And from a civic engagement standpoint, how do we get people to talk about not the issues du jour, not the things that appealed to our amygdalas, whatever caught on fire or blew up in that day, but the real issues like we've lost 40,000 people, because I haven't met anyone in Akron yet that's what they're talking about. So I would ask you, what problems does your city love, and how can you equip citizens to take action on them? One little trick I will tell you that from doing this in a number of cities over time is that principles are more important than projects. I'm happy to share with you, the project descriptions. We usually give away the intellectual property on all those projects so that if you want to do any of those things, you can, but that the principles are more important. And I would say keep with you the principles that you learn along the way, because when you get going really fast and you get into the throes of whatever your next big challenge is, it's really easy to lose the lessons that you've picked up. For me, I'm a very literal guy, so I've written them all down. I keep them in a portfolio with me at all times, so that I usually know the moments when the shit's hitting the fan, and I go back to the list and say, okay, am I really about to screw up here? And then I'll close with something. It's interesting that the planning director from Decatur, Georgia is here, because my grandfather, his office was on the square in downtown Decatur, Georgia, and he wrote a letter to me when I was 11 years old, and in that letter it said, sometimes the little things that you do in life turn out to be the really big things. And I think that that's very true for life, but it's also very true for cities. Big silver bullet projects, I've not encountered one in any place that actually has worked. It's a million little things that turn out to make a really great place. So thanks.